Welcome. You're listening to episode 27 of Pause and Play with Dr. J, the Preventive Vet podcast. On today's show, we discuss the importance of wet food for cats. All cats, but male cats in particular. And hey, did you know that we have books to help cats and dogs live longer, happier, healthier lives? Buy one for an animal that you love today at shop.preventivevet.com. And now, let's start the show. Welcome back to another episode of Pause and Play with Dr. J. I am your co-host, Mia, and I've got Dr. J here with me. How are you doing?
I am great, Mia. Thanks. How are you?
I am doing very well. It is once again overcast over here, a little chilly. Reminds me of like early morning summer camp weather when...
Oh, yeah.
Overnight camp, slept in tents. I was very outdoorsy, apparently, when I was much younger. That went away very quickly.
It cured you of that real quick.
Yeah, somehow. Speaking of wet, oh, wow, I didn't even plan this transition.
Perfect segue,
From
though.
wet summer mornings to why wet food is so important for cats.
Yeah.
And again, something that I only learned once joining up with Preventive Vet, and thankfully just at the right time when I got my kitty Mazel. So Dr. J, take us away. This is one of like your biggest things that you champion.
Yeah. I am a huge fan of wet food for cats, for all cats really, but especially male cats because of their increased risk for urinary obstruction, which was the condition that initially led me to start Preventive Vet all those years ago. So I'm a huge fan of wet food for cats. A lot of people think of wet food as a treat, an occasional treat for their cat, and they feed them predominantly dry food. But the reality is that should typically be reversed. That a little bit of dry food maybe is a treat here and there, for use during the day for them to kind of hunt and graze. But the majority of most cats' calories, should ideally come from a high protein, low carbohydrate canned cat food. As far as why, because that tends to be, one of the main questions that I get.
Well, that was going to be the question that I was going to ask.
Look at that.
Yeah,
Perfect.
Why?
I can predict these things. I'm reading your mind. Be afraid. Be very
Get out
afraid.
of there.
Yeah, I know, right? What are all these cobwebs? And where am I?
Seriously. You hear an owl in the distance.
There's an echo in here. What's going on? Really, why? The main thing for me, well, there's really two main things. One of the biggest things is hydration. There's a lot of, yes, cats are, derived from desert-dwelling animals and, or we're desert-dwelling animals. And so their kidneys are really good at concentrating their urine. So they're really good in scenarios of, low water consumption or availability. But they no longer live in deserts. They don't have to do that. And so why make the kidneys work that hard, and then potentially risk, deteriorating more rapidly over time. And then again, like urethral obstruction, urinary obstruction, or even bladder inflammation. A lot of these things are made more likely or worsened because of dehydration. And I feel that a lot of cats are walking around out there what we would call subclinically dehydrated. So maybe they don't have clinical signs of dehydration, or maybe they do and people just don't realize it because cats don't tend to drink a ton of water, or they drink enough for what they need. But this is one of those situations where within reason, more can be better. We have this saying in veterinary surgery, and I'm sure it's on the human surgical side as well, and in a lot of other things, that the solution to pollution is dilution. So if you've got a cat's bladder that is inflamed for whatever reason, or potentially has higher concentrations of minerals that could gather up into stones and cause inflammation or an obstruction, the more water you have passing through their kidneys and then therefore their bladder and their urinary system, the more often they're going to be flushing that out and decreasing those inflammatory mediators, decreasing those concentrations of minerals, decreasing, the grit, all of these things that can cause problems. So I prefer my cats hydrated. And canned food
well, it's kind of like for us too, right? Like,
yes.
like I don't drink enough water, but certainly it helps to flush toxins out of our system.
Totally. And it just generally helps us feel better. I mean, like when I get dehydrated, I tend to get a headache and, muscle cramps. And so water is vitally important in the body. And canned food is just such an easy way to get it into your cat. Like, yeah, you could do the water recirculators and flavor their water and stuff. And it's still great stuff for people to do. But cats got to eat. And so, why not kind of combine the two, during their meal, the food and the water in a way so that you're helping to ensure both, which is great. So easy way to get and ensure their hydration. And should they ever wind up with kidney disease later in life, you're probably going to have to get them on a canned food anyway. So may as well start now and hopefully delay the onset of that or potentially even help prevent it as well as urethral obstruction. The other reason why I really love canned food for cats is cats really, again, we go back to their origins, their ideal food is a mouse. Like that's what their body has mostly developed to eat and their teeth and everything. So now I'm not suggesting that people feed their cats mice, but canned food tends to have a closer matched what we would call macronutrient composition, so protein, carbohydrates, fat in terms of their relative proportions. Canned foods, typically match those ratios better than most dry foods. Most dry foods are chock full of carbohydrates. And it's not that cats can't digest or handle carbohydrates, but they tend to do better on high protein diets that more closely mimic what mice are. And so canned foods tend to have a closer composition to that. And really the ideal, kind of like what the mouse is and what we sort of strive for in terms of macronutrient composition for cats in their diet, is that you want their protein, the amount of protein in their diet to be roughly 50 to 60% of the calories that they're getting. And then the next highest one would actually be fat. So fat isn't a bad thing for cats. And you really want that to be at about 30 to 40%. So if they're getting about a 60% protein diet, you want them to be having about 30% fat. If they're getting a 50% protein diet, you want them to be getting about 40% fat, leaving the other 10% roughly, and ideally even slightly under that, to be carbohydrates. And so we know that a diet in that sort of a ratio of a high protein, low carb can help to combat obesity in cats, to help prevent them from becoming obese, as well as to help correct obesity in cats. And obesity in cats has a very close link to diabetes in cats. So if we can prevent them from ever becoming obese, and we tend to call obese cats sort of pre-diabetic, if we can prevent them from becoming obese in that pre-diabetic state, with diet, then that's fantastic. But also if they become diabetic, lots of cats have actually resolve their diabetes either solely with a transition to a high protein, low carbohydrate canned food, or in conjunction with insulin, but frequently they get off of their need for insulin after a period of time. So really those are the two main reasons why I love canned food for cats. There are others, but those two should be enough for most people. Hopefully.
Yeah. Well, and just a reminder that, two reminders. One, that cats are obligate carnivores.
Yes.
Which is something,
awesome.
Just something that I like to say. It's kind of,
I know it sounds cool, doesn't it?
Yeah. I feel like I sound really smart.
Which maybe we should define it for people. It just means that they need animal protein in their diet.
Right.
So
they
obligate
cannot be
meaning
vegetarians.
Correct. And definitely not vegan. And it's because of the amino acids and some of the essential fatty acids that are only found really in animal proteins. Who knows, maybe one of these days they will create a lab-derived food that will mimic that for cats. That'd be great, and that would help with some of the ethical concerns people have and the reason why they try and feed them vegan or vegetarian. But until that day comes and we've got diets like that we know are safe and that cats can not just thrive on, but actually even survive, they need a meat-based diet.
Yes. And as a reminder of what urethral obstruction is, we have a podcast on that because unfortunately Mazel, I mean, we would have done it anyway, but Mazel, my cat, went through it. And if you ever see your cat straining to pee, get him to the vet or emergency vet immediately. Yeah. Just throwing it out there. If you want to learn more about that, we'll link that in the blog notes for this show.
Well, and I would even go a step further, Mia, just because a lot of people see their cat straining in the litter box and assume that it's maybe constipation. So if you see your cat straining in the litter box, vocalizing in the litter box, going to the litter box more frequently, and potentially like not really making many deposits, especially if they're a male cat, that is a acute medical emergency. Better safe than sorry. Get them to the vet. Your vet, emergency vet. Don't wait till the morning. Don't wait it out and see if, give them pumpkin and see if they pass their poop. The greater probability is that they have a urethral obstruction, and that needs to be treated immediately.
Yes. So sorry for the aside there, but an important aside.
and me jumping on my soapbox because I hate urethral obstructions. I want to prevent them every chance we get.
No, it's
because
devastating.
They're devastating.
Yeah. So listen, I will move the soapbox over for you to stand on, Jason. Here, get on my shoulders.
Right.
But, so it's interesting because, the way that you talk about kibble, it's like a special treat, or, it sounds kind of like junk food. It would, and a lot of people would make the argument that it's good for, like as a dental instrument. What would you say to that?
Well, first I'd laugh, not intentionally. It's just it's a reflex. The reality is that most kibble, first of all, a lot of cats don't even chew their kibble. A lot of cats just chuck it down the gullet, and that's why we get sort of that scarf and barf for a lot of cats. So a lot of cats don't even chew their kibble. A lot of kibble is so dry and dehydrated and so small in kibble size that even if they do chew it, they maybe just take one crunch, it sort of falls apart, and then they swallow it. So there's not a lot of mechanical action with the chewing. So there are diets, there are dry food diets that are specifically formulated either because of, kibble size or the composition, the types of fibers and the orientation, or treatment with special compounds that can help bind the different factors of the saliva that can increase dental disease. So there are specific dental diets for cats. And you can use those as their treats. Like you could use those as their little bit of kibble to hunt for through the day. But what I frequently say to people is, we can anesthetize a cat and clean their teeth. And we should be doing that on a regular basis anyway. We can't anesthetize them and clean out their kidneys. Yes, there is renal transplant, there are kidney transplant, operations that can happen, but you don't want to go there, really ideally if you can ever avoid it. So it's easier to take care of their teeth, with a little bit with diet, but also home care with brushing and then routine dental care with your vet. But really, the urinary system is so critically important for cats, and it tends to be one of the systems that fails them the most frequently throughout their life in terms of inflammation that maybe gets them peeing outside of the box, which is one of the main reasons why cats wind up in shelters, or urethral obstruction, that winds up, unfortunately, a lot of cats are euthanized because of it, or they die acutely because of it, or it just drains pet owners emotionally and financially. And then also cats as they get older and they get degenerative, renal disease, chronic kidney disease, helping to keep them hydrated can help prevent that from happening. And then there's the whole obesity and diabetes benefit of it. So I love that people are thinking about their cat's teeth, and I know that brushing a cat's teeth is not very easy. In the best case scenario.
And tell me about it, because I've never tried.
Yeah, I mean, and truth be told, Mia, this is just between you and me. I've never brushed my cat's teeth either. So
I won't tell
now everybody else can take their fingers out of their ears, because nobody should hear that. But I love that people are thinking about their cat's teeth. I want them to start thinking about their cat's urinary system even more. And also the prevention or correction of obesity and diabetes, and high protein, low carbohydrate canned food can help do that.
All right. So let's say that, you have you've been feeding only kibble, and your cat is quite the junkie. I know that Mazel loves his, but it's also he has a hard time eating anything just because his little poor
he's a
beautiful
smushy face.
flat face. But so we give him both options, and whatever he can get down there is great. But let's say that you've got a dry food junkie. How do you get them transitioned over towards the wet food?
Yeah, well, and unfortunately, there are a lot of dry food junkies and addicts, as in the feline world, just because of the way that people previously and historically thought about food and the proportions of wet versus dry, or just dry exclusively. So, I would say to start minimizing the number of dry food junkies in the future, it is very important to introduce. If anyone out there is listening that has a kitten, now is the time, especially, to get them used to canned food. Kittens will form a preference and associations with the texture of their food. So a cat that has never tried canned food before, especially early on when that imprint period is happening, it may be more difficult to transition them. It can be done, typically. It might just take longer. So help yourself and your cat now, as a kitten, ideally, getting them used to canned food now so that they will recognize that as food. It would be the reverse would be true too. If they never got exposed to dry food when they were younger and then you tried to give it to them when they were older, they might take quite a long time to take to it because they might not recognize it as food. So
that's so funny. I never would have thought about that. Maybe because, you don't see the same thing with dogs.
Right. Yeah. Well, dogs,
everything.
They're like, food. Awesome. Like, is that food? I don't care. I'm going to eat it and I'll find out later if it's food. Cats, on the other hand, are like, that might be food to you, but you're going to have to do better for me. So cats can be more finicky. We love them for it.
Or smart.
Or smart, whatever the case may be. And I would agree that cats are quite smart. But really, ideally, get your kitten used to it now. Now, that said, there are a lot of dry food junkies out there that have, maybe people have tried with canned food and the cat won't eat it. And I've had lots of people tell me in the clinic, my cat will not eat wet food. And the vast majority of them, a month later, 3 months later, 6 months later, a year later, whatever it takes, they are transitioned over to either exclusively or predominantly canned food. And the key here is that it is not a race. You don't have to transition them over in 24 hours. Like, they've been eating dry food for several years typically. If it takes you several months to get them onto a healthier diet for them and their renal system, their urinary system, and their, obesity and their pancreas, and to prevent diabetes, if it takes you a few or several months, awesome. The goal is just to get them there. So you never want to out-stubborn a cat, especially an obese cat, because then you can wind up with hepatic lipidosis, which, we've got an article on the site, but so people can learn more about that. But really the step is slow and steady. So find a good quality canned cat food, introduce it to your cat. Like, before you put down their kibble, and again, ideally, people aren't just feeding free feed, like, open buffet style of dry food even, because that's a whole other topic and that can make this potentially more difficult. But give them the canned food before you give them their dry food and see what they do. See if they interact with it. See if they eat it. Some cats will surprise you and they will just go right for it. Perfect. So go that way.
Yeah, if they do not.
Yeah, and if they do not, which unfortunately some cats will not take to it immediately, there are some tricks you can do to help increase the palatability and the attractiveness of it to them. One thing is and I always encourage people to add a little bit more water to the canned food anyway, because again, the more water we get in, typically the better hydration they have. I mean, obviously everything has its limits. If your cat is draining your toilet bowl dry and everything, they might already have diabetes or kidney disease. Have them worked up by your vet.
Also, don't let them drain your toilet bowl.
Yes,
don't let them drink out of your toilet bowl.
Yes, good point.
That's number one.
Yeah,
How about that?
Back that up a second. But add a little bit more water to it. And then the other thing you could do is just gently warm it up. So if you just add warm tap water to it, cats are very they smell things a lot, especially food. They really depend on their sense of smell, which is why when you get a cat with an upper respiratory tract infection that's got a snotty nose and everything, they might be less inclined to eat frequently. One of the reasons is because they can't smell the food. Well, if you add warm tap water, you warm it up very gently, just very briefly in the microwave, you don't want it too hot, that can help to release some of the aromas, and that might then make that much more attractive to the cat. There's also, Purina's got a product there, probiotic. It's called Fortiflora, their main one. They just came out with a calming one for dogs. But their main product is Fortiflora is a probiotic, and they make one for cats. I will tell you that in the ICU, we used to use Fortiflora all the time for cats that were not super keen on eating, because they love the taste of it. I mean, we talk about dry food junkies. There's lots of cats out there that are Fortiflora junkies, but in a good way.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, it's it's magic. And then you get the benefit of the fact that it helps with their digestive microbiome because it's a probiotic. And there's even some early data, I think, that's showing that it can actually help keep upper respiratory tract infections at bay in cats. So I think that's early data. But again, so that's another tip to help them get onto the canned food. So you could sprinkle a little bit of that over top of it. Other things that can enhance palatability for cats are things like grated cheese. So like the Kraft stuff in the green tube. You could just sprinkle a little bit of that on. Some nutritional yeast powder sometimes does the trick.
The Kraft stuff in the green, are you talking about Parmesan cheese?
Yeah. And cats, they love it. They love it.
Cats love it.
Yeah, there you go. Mikey likes it. So those would be some tricks to help kind of increase the amount that they're eating. But again, they don't have to, in the first sitting, eat all of their calories in canned food. If they just start interacting with it and eating it, that's great. Once they walk away from it, then give them their dry food. And then you slowly try and increase the proportion, the percentage of the calories they're getting from their canned food. And the goal is to get them as high a percentage of their calories, their daily calories, in canned food as possible relative to dry food. And so if you start off with, they're getting 5% of their calories in canned food, and then a week later they're getting 10%, and a week later they're getting 20%. Again, if it takes you months, it's still for their benefit, and that's great. I mean, I will tell you, when we adopted our cat from the shelter, he was fed his whole life on dry food, and it took me 3 months to really get him thinking about canned food as food. And part of that was actually taking the dry food he was on and crushing it up in a plastic bag and then sprinkling that on top of it. So kind of trying to trick him. So that would be another tip to help. But it took me...
Did that work? Did that that help?
Yeah, it helped him start eating it. And I would say it took about 9.5 months to really get him like, hey, cool, wet food is awesome, but it's worth it.
So you got to just really hang in there.
You do.
You're
Persistence is the key. Now, some people will mix the can and the dry together. I think it's nice to not do that. One, because then the dry gets soggy and it's not going to be able to, it's not going to be as fresh for them, if you will. And then you also don't know how much of the calories they're getting from the canned food. I would initially at least start with offering them separately and at different, canned food first, and then the dry food so they could get the rest of their calories. And then again, the ultimate goal is that morning and evening, or maybe morning, evening, and midday, they're getting a meal of canned food. Again, high protein, low carb, add in a little bit more water. You can even add in some fiber to help make sure that their stools are passing through, depending on how high protein the diet is. And then throughout the day, because it's nice for them to hunt for their food and engage with their food that way, to play with their food, you can give them a little bit of kibble, an interactive toy. Although there are also interactive feeders that you can use with wet food for cats. So that's the goal, and there are ways to transition them. Persistence, but also patience is key. But it'll pay off in the end.
Somebody really needs to sell me on the interactive wet food feeders, because just in my household, that would not. Well, first of all, if Marshall was out, he would be eating that food. And secondly, if not, I'm just imagining it like the wet food flying all over the place, Mazel knocking it.
Well, one of the main ones really is I think it's called the Licky mat or something like that. It's a little sort of silicone or rubber mat that has these little kind of finger-like projections, but small. And so they do have to use their tongue to kind of work between the little crevices and get the food. So, it's not like they're not solving a Rubik's Cube. to get their food. But they are engaging their brain a little bit more. It is slowing them down a little bit more. And then there are other ones as well.
So it's a different kind of interactive feeder than what I'm imagining in my head.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's not like the dog tornado, although you could use that for wet food. I don't know if, for the listeners who aren't familiar with the dog tornado, it's this really cool bone-shaped plastic feeder that spins around, revealing little pockets in the different levels, typically used for dogs that they've got, and then you can increase the difficulty. You could do that with wet food for cats. Like, again, you could train cats. They are smart. So you could put a little bit of their wet food in there, and you can actually put a little bit of their wet food, a little bit of their dry food, just make it a game. And that's great.
Yeah, that'd be kind of fun. My interest is piqued.
Look at that. Mission accomplished. I'm out of here.
I dropped the mic. No,
mic drop.
Don't do that.
Yeah.
I actually just bought one of those, the licky things, pads, for Marshall to try to freeze some of his stuff for the summer. But looks like I'll have to get another one for Mazel and test that out.
Yeah, and you might want to then put it up on a counter if you're cool with Maz being up on the counter, so that Marshall then won't invade that, and Mazel.
Oh, yeah. Well, Mazel actually, he has the entire kitchen table to himself.
Yeah. That's nice that he lets you all in it.
It's not where we eat; it's where he eats.
Yeah.
So
I'm sure many listeners will relate to that.
Yeah. But, speaking of leaving things out and everything, one of the big questions that I've always had is like, how long is it okay to leave the food out, the wet food out? Because, for Mazel, I give him his dinner and then I leave it out for him because he likes to nibble throughout the late night.
Yep.
But it's out there until the morning when I wake up, which, is probably 8 or 7 hours later.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the conventional wisdom is, and hopefully nobody from the Food Safety Board, if that's a thing, is listening. But I think the conventional wisdom is like, an hour, maybe 2 at room temperature. But the reality is, and the practicality is that there's plenty of cats, and Smudge included, my cat, where his wet food sits out and sometimes even overnight because I forget to pick it up before I go to bed. And he's fine. It really depends on the heat and the humidity in your home, whether or not you have ants, things of that nature, how soon they're going to eat it. Again, ideally you put it down, they spend, 5-10 minutes eating, all of it or as much as they can. And then maybe you leave it down, see if they go back to it. And then if they need something to graze on overnight or during the day, you could put out a little bit of kibble, a measured amount. Don't just fill a bowl and leave it. But the other trick is, because one of the things that people look at with wet food is logistically, like if they're out all day, at work or they're going to go to the gym afterwards, are they going to be home in time to feed their cat? There are automatic feeders that can be used with wet food, and there are some even that can help to keep it cool. The other thing that you could do is you can actually freeze a little bit of wet food. Like if you're not going to be home in time for their evening meal. Now, obviously, if you have multiple cats or certainly if you have a dog, this becomes a little bit more complicated. But if you have one cat or two and they can share, when you feed them in the morning with their wet food, you can also then put out in another bowl some frozen wet food. You can add a little bit more water to it and freeze it so it stays cooler longer. Now, most cats will tend to not eat frozen, like really cold stuff. Yeah, but by the time it thaws and kind of gets to room temperature, at which point they're more apt to eat it, that's probably going to be around dinner time. So there are some things you can do. Now, every cat is going to respond differently. You just have to find what works well for you and logistically and in your home and with your cats. But there are ways to do it. I think 4 to 6 hours, again, don't quote me on this, in terms of what's going to be really good from a food safety standpoint, but probably 4 to 6 hours would be okay.
Well, I like that whole frozen thing. I think that's really creative and just something interesting to try for the summer.
Yeah.
Just to see if Maz would like a little popsicle.
Yeah.
wet food.
Again, most cats aren't going to be super keen on frozen things, but there are cats that, lick ice cubes, so you never know. And actually, that brings up another point that I guess I forgot earlier is when you talk about the summer, with heat, and cats are susceptible to heat exhaustion and heat stroke. They tend to not suffer it as often as dogs. But again, dehydration predisposes cats and dogs to heat exhaustion and heat stroke and heat-related illness. So that's the other nice thing about wet food is that you're getting more water into them, and you can add more water to it. So especially in the summertime, in the warmer months, adding more water to their canned food. And the same thing applies for dogs to help them avoid dehydration and prevent heat-related illness in the summer is ideally, again, you're feeding them a little bit of canned food, add water to it. You're ensuring their hydration, or taking steps to help better ensure their hydration.
Earlier, you had mentioned feeding a high-quality canned food. So there are so many brands out there, and I know that you kind of went over some of the makeup of the ideal, mice being the ideal kind of food. But there's just such a wide variety to choose from and a wide variety of prices of those. So like, how do you know which ones to choose? I try my best to get the highest quality, but I also feel like how do I even know? Yeah, well, and that because companies are really good at marketing. Highest quality is not always related to price or how pretty the label looks. In that respect, it's kind of like wine. But it's the same thing with dry food. It's really the goal is, okay, so what does your pet, in this case, what does your cat do the best on? Like what diet is their energy the best on? What diet is their coat the best on? What diet are their stools the best on? What diet are they not vomiting on or not having hairballs or things of that nature? And then when they have their lab work checked, every year, every other year, every 6 months, whatever their sort of plan they're on, depending on age, how do their kidneys look? How do their liver values? How do all of these things kind of come into play? So really, what diet is your cat thriving on? But then you also have to take into account, what can you afford to feed? You don't need the most expensive food in the store, and sometimes even if you can afford it, it might not be the best food for your cat. But then also, what can you find reliably? Like more and more people are traveling with their cats, or, so what can you find reliably? If you run out of their food, you really don't want to abruptly change their food. So what can you reliably go into your local pet store or grocery store or whatever, or to your vet and get reliably? And then, but really, again, here with the canned food, one of the main things we're looking at is that protein, carb, fat ratio. And unfortunately, it's apples to oranges where you're looking at canned food and dry food. And what you've got to do is convert the percentages in the canned food, because that's as fed, that's reported as fed on the side of the label or on the website of the company that makes it. And then you've got to convert it into dry matter so that you can know and compare it to dry food, and you can get those, those ratios of macronutrients that I talked about earlier in terms of, 50-60 in protein percentage on a dry matter basis, 30 to 40% fat on a dry matter basis, and then 10% or ideally lower of carbohydrates on a dry matter basis. And we can have a link in the blog about how to do that conversion from fed to dry matter. This is so much math for me, Jason.
No, I know, but it doesn't have to be
exploding.
First of all, there's lots of people out there that like math. Mia, thank you very much. And cat owners are typically very smart. So
yes, but not me.
Yeah, but I think we'll also try and find a little. I think we'll also try and find a little calculator that maybe that people can just plug those numbers into, and
that'd be great. Yeah.
Google or the interwebs can do the calculations for them. But that is really the main thing. That is what's going to help to determine quality for you in terms of your cat's food, is if it's most closely matching that ideal macronutrient profile. Now, again, there are cats that have existing medical conditions where maybe that's not the right balance for them. Although even senior cats, as long as their kidneys are working fine, they need protein too. This idea of protein restriction in cats, older cats, is not necessarily or always or even frequently true. Cats still need protein. They need high quality protein because if their body's not getting it, they're just going to break down their own body muscle and flood their system with with the metabolic byproducts of protein anyway. So we've got to give it to them in their diet, but that's a whole other aside. So that's how you really choose the best diet for your cat. It's going to be individual. Ask your veterinarian. They're an amazing resource for you. You don't have to spend a ton of money on your cat's food. You want to get that macronutrient profile as close to that sort of ideal mouse diet as possible, and then being able to reliably find it, being able to afford it long term, and then the fact that your cat's thriving on it. Those are all the critical things to look for. And an AAFCO statement to make sure it's complete and nutritionally balanced.
Sounds good. And for those of you who don't know what an AAFCO statement is.
Oh, no, there's a reason why we do acronyms, Mia. I can't always remember. So it's like Association American Feed Control Organization or some combination of that. And that's my final answer.
And I know that they have like a seal. Like a specific seal that you can look for.
Yeah,
and they're two seals?
And they're basically saying like it's either, it's a complete nutritionally balanced diet, so you don't have to supplement it with anything. You can feed them that exclusively, and from a biochemical and health standpoint, they're getting what they need. And then there's two. One stamp is formulated to meet the dietary requirements of adult cats or whatever it is, and then the other is actually been tested to ensure that it meets the dietary needs of cats. So, because we know there's published needs as far as all the macro and micronutrients and things of that nature. And so you can have nutritionists, veterinary nutritionists formulate the diet based on those and go, okay, that's what's published. We know that that's what they need. It meets that. We're good. Or you can have other companies that go, yeah, it meets that. Let's make sure though. Let's test it. Yeah. We think we have the best food, so it's not torture to now test it on cats. So let's have a control colony of cats. Let's feed them the diet, check, what their stools look like, check their biochemistry, their liver values, their kidneys, all that fun stuff, and let's see how they interact. And let's actually prove that it's, in this case, literally doing what it says on the tin. Like, let's make sure that they can thrive on this diet. So those are things to look for, really.
Yeah, so I will look for the seals and put it in the images in the blog post so everybody knows what to look for.
Yep.
Because it does sound like, especially that last one would be really important that it's been tested.
It's nice
and proven.
It's nice. Yeah. And, scientific proof is always a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for this really important information. I hope that this will help convince others to go on and get their wet food on for their kitties.
Get their wet food on for their cat. Yeah. Because your cat's kidneys are like, please, I need hydration. Give it to me. Yeah, no, hopefully this helps to convert more people into wet food advocates for cats, and helps to dispel that myth of, all dry food is better for your cat's teeth, and helps to kind of reverse that idea of, a little bit of wet food is a treat. Think about the other way. Wet food is the staple of their diet, and a little bit of dry food, maybe as a treat or for them to hunt for during the day.
Right on. Well, thanks again for listening, everybody, and we will be back with another Pause and Play with Dr. J podcast soon. Thanks for listening. If you've got a question for Dr. J that you want him to answer on an upcoming show, head over to preventivevet.com/pauseandplay and fill out our form. You'll also find our podcast archive, as well as links to everything that we discuss on the shows. While you're there, sign up for our newsletter, which includes tips, alerts, and we even made sure to include some cuteness. It's a treat delivered to your inbox every other week. You can subscribe to Pause and Play with Dr. J on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and iHeartRadio. We'll talk to you again soon.